그래서 제가 오늘 김치에 대한 빠른 정보를 알려드리려고 해요. 김치는 한국의 전통 발효 식품인데요. 한국에서 가장 많이 접하는 김치는 배추김치예요. 고춧가루, 마늘, 젓갈 등 다양한 양념을 넣어 버무려 발효시키면 맛있는 김치가 탄생합니다. 와, 맛있겠다. 선생님, 김치 종류가 엄청나게 많다고 들었어요.
네.
어떤 게 있어요?
김치는 배추김치를 한국 사람들은 제일 많이 먹긴 해요. 뭐 깍두기, 총각김치, 무로 만든 김치가 있고 갓김치, 파김치, 부추김치, 그리고 오이소박이, 열무김치 이런 식으로 모든 채소가 다 김치를 담글 수가 있어요. 김치의 세계는 무궁무진해요. 그래서 김치의 맛은 전국에 어머니 숫자만큼 있었어요. 집집마다 맛이 다 달랐기 때문에 김치가 맵기만 한 줄 알지만 꼭 그렇지 않아요. 고춧가루 들어가지 않은 백김치도 있고요. 물김치도 있고 과일김치도 있어요. 그리고 요즘은 해외에서 김치를 많이 찾고 있어요. 먹어보고 간 좀 봐요.
너무 맛있어요.
네, 맛있어요.
한국 바로 알리기 여러분도 함께 해주세요.
Just thinking about it, it's like I can almost smell it, I can almost hear it bubbling and everything, and it just, that steam, you know, that comes up, ooh, it's like I can feel it right now. Yes. Hello, my name is Alexa, and I am a K-pop artist under ZB label. When I think that far back, there was a local Korean restaurant in my hometown in Tulsa. I don't remember if I tried it there or when I tried it when I first came to Korea, but all I remember was it was years ago, but the taste is what I remembered. My mom, she does cook some Korean food. Being of Korean descent, I have been eating so much tofu ever since I was a child, but it is one of my favorite and most versatile foods you can use to create so many other dishes, such as 된장찌개. But when it comes to, you know, actually eating it and enjoying it, it must be served in a tteokbokki, which is like, to translate to English, I guess like a hot stone pot, I guess. And that's gonna keep the food nice and hot till the very last bite. It's just, you can't eat it in like a plastic bowl. Like, it needs to be in the tteokbokki. That is like 필수. That is necessary for this. star of the show is centrally doenjang, like the soybean paste. So as long as that's delicious, the stew's gonna be delicious no matter what, so no worries there. But all the flavors coming together to create that really like decadent, very flavorful broth. And again, when it's really hot and the tteokbokki and the steam just comes up and it just emits those nice fragrances, it's just an unforgettable experience if somebody's never tried tteokbokki before. On the occasion, I've had some where there's like clams or mussel, or like occasionally like a crab leg or something. Other than that, I'm not quite sure. Again, I don't really cook. I don't really know what goes in it, but it tastes good, and that's all that matters to me. When I think about that, it just kind of reminds me of coming home from a long day of work, whether it's just full schedule or just practicing, and I just need all of my stress to go away. And thinking about this just brings me to that point of relaxation where everything is just fine, everything's good. Whenever I eat doenjang, since it is a food that brings a lot of comfort to me, I guess, one thing that I do think of is my mother, because in the autumnal and winter season, she would always cook, different stews for the family, whether it was just chicken stew, beef stew, kimchi jjigae even. But I don't know, I think the warmth of just a nice hot stew just makes me think of, like a hug from my mom.
In our headlines on this Thursday, April 2nd, here in South Korea, President Lee Jae-myung urges lawmakers across the aisle for swift passage of the government's proposal for a supplementary budget to better counter the economic consequences of the conflict in the Middle East. Also, on the local front, consumer prices rise 2.2% in March on year, driven largely by soaring global oil prices, which have pushed the price of petroleum products up by almost 10% on year. Meanwhile, U.S. President Donald Trump claims his campaign against Iran is nearing completion. In a televised address late Wednesday local time, that analysts say failed to address anything new. We start yet again on the local front, where President Lee Jae-myung addressed the National Assembly urging for bipartisan support in fast-tracking the government's proposal for a supplementary budget to ward off the economic fallout of the unrest in the Middle East. Our Blue House correspondent Song Yu-jin reports.
President Lee Jae-myung says the government's more than $17 billion supplementary budget kept this in mind.
위기일수록 사회적 약자를 더 두텁게 보호해야 한다는 원칙과 경제 회생의 골든타임을 놓치지 않겠다는 각오 아래 총 26조 2천억 원 규모의 추가 경정 예산안을 마련했습니다.
Delivering a budget speech at the National Assembly on Thursday, President Lee described the spending plan as one that makes bold investments where they are most needed in response to the Middle East crisis, while minimizing the burden on households and businesses.
이번 추경안은 국채를 발행하지 않는 빚 없는 추경이라는 점을 분명하게 말씀드립니다. 정시 반도체 경기 호황 등에 따른 초과 세수 25조 2천억 원과 기금 자체 재원 1조를 활용할 계획입니다.
The extra budget focuses on easing the burden on consumers and businesses affected by rising oil prices, with more than 10 trillion won allocated for this. A key measure is direct cash support for some 36 million people, the bottom 70% of income earners.
소득 수준과 지역 우대 원칙에 따라 1인당 기본 10만 원에서 최대 60만 원까지 차등 지원하겠습니다. 지원금은 지역 화폐로 지급하여 지역과 골목 상권의 소상공인 자영업자에게 도움이 되고 경기 활성화에도 기여할 수 있도록 설계하였다.
President Lee also outlined plans to expand financial support for small business owners and compensate those affected by the oil price cap. Looking further ahead, he pledged to increase financing for renewable energy to reduce South Korea's heavy reliance on fossil fuels. Wrapping up his more than 15-minute address, Lee urged bipartisan support to ensure the bill's swift passage, saying that overcoming a crisis depends on speed. The National Assembly is set to review the budget next week before putting it to a vote at a plenary session. The ruling and opposition parties previously agreed to pass it by next Friday. 송유진, Arirang News.
Elsewhere, in a televised address roughly 7 hours ago, U.S. President Donald Trump told the American people that his military campaign against Iran is nearing completion. Our Moon Hye-ryun has the latest.
Thanks to the progress we've made, I can say tonight that we are on track to complete all of America's military objectives shortly, very shortly. We're going to hit them extremely hard over the next 2 to 3 weeks.
In his primetime address on Wednesday, U.S. President Donald Trump touted the progress made by Operation Epic Fury in disabling Iran's Navy, weapons factories, and missile and drone operations. He added that the U.S. operation will continue until all his objectives are met, saying that there could be severe economic pain and instability unless it is guaranteed that Iran does not obtain a nuclear weapon. Speaking on America's role in the conflict, Trump said the military action is not aimed at securing resources like oil, but at supporting U.S. allies, emphasizing that the U.S. no longer depends on the Middle East for energy. Ahead of this speech, Tehran had firmly denied Trump's claim that Iran is seeking a ceasefire. In a social media post on Wednesday, Trump said Iran's new regime president, whom he did not name, had requested a ceasefire, suggesting that any pause in fighting would depend on the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz, a choke point for global energy supplies. He paired that claim with a warning of heavy strikes if conditions aren't met. But Tehran quickly pushed back. Its foreign ministry dismissed the statement as false and baseless, while the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps insisted the strategic waterway remains firmly under Iranian control and would not be reopened under pressure from Washington. That denial was followed by a direct appeal from Iran's president, who published a letter addressed to the American people just hours before Trump's scheduled address. In it, he questioned the justification for the war and argued that Iran poses no threat to warrant such military action against it. He emphasized that Tehran's actions are rooted in self-defense and suggested the United States is acting on behalf of Israel rather than its own national interest. The letter also underscored that Iran holds no hostility towards ordinary Americans, even as the conflict intensifies. Trump on Wednesday also questioned why the U.S. should secure the Strait of Hormuz, suggesting countries like South Korea, Japan, China, and European nations, which rely heavily on the route, should take on that responsibility instead. Moon Hye-ryun, Arirang News.
And Iran is reportedly making an audacious ask of oil tankers seeking to access the Strait of Hormuz. The country is calling for a toll fee, one that needs to be paid in Chinese currency or in cryptocurrency. Our Yoon Jin has more.
Iran has developed a plan to charge a toll to oil tankers passing through the Strait of Hormuz of approximately $1 per barrel, with payments to be made in Chinese Yuan or stablecoins, as reported by Bloomberg, citing multiple sources on Wednesday. It was reported that Iran's National Security Committee approved the bill for the measure on March 30th. Bloomberg said, according to these sources, that vessel operators would have to contact an intermediary company linked to the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps and provide information about the tank, including its ownership, the flag it carries, cargo manifest, destination, crew list, and data from what's called an automated identification system, which is a transponder that ships use to record and broadcast their position. The intermediary company then passes the information onto the Guard Corps' provincial command for background checks to confirm that it has no links to Israel or the U.S. or states that Iran considers enemies. Iran has a ranking system for nations from 1 to 5 that determines the friendliness of nations, with ships from more friendly countries likely to get better terms. The negotiating terms for oil tankers start at a value of $1 per barrel. Oil tankers typically have a loading capacity of around 2 million barrels, which means they would need to pay roughly $2 million in tolls. Once the toll is paid, the Guard Corps will issue an authorization code and route instructions. The ships will be expected to raise the flag of the nation that they negotiated the passage agreement with and will be escorted through the passage by a patrol boat. The legal basis of this passage, dubbed the Iranian tollbooth, remains unclear, including how sanctions may be applied. And there are also issues of what is covered by insurance, as insurance costs have spiked for tankers that want to cross the Strait of Hormuz. 이은진, Arirang News.
Now, as seen in that report, the plight of oil tankers in the Middle East are indeed raising the burden of prices at the pumps for consumers worldwide. And for a gauge of the public sentiment here, I have our economics correspondent Kim Jun-hong standing by live at a filling station in capital Seoul. Jun-hong, do fill us in.
Yes, Sunny, I'm standing at a gas station here in Seoul. Even though this particular station offers prices lower than nearby stations, gasoline and diesel are both in the 1,981 range, approximately $1 and 31 cents per liter. Just a few days ago, this gas station was crowded with drivers lining up to fill their cars. But with fuel prices continuing to climb, the atmosphere is noticeably quieter today. Staff here say the number of customers has dropped sharply since last Saturday, since the government's new price cap came into effect. Drivers we managed to speak to say the steady price hikes are becoming harder to ignore. Let's take a listen.
I'm trying to minimize how often I fill up my car, and if it's not really necessary, I use public transportation instead. I also run a restaurant, and it's not just the cost of gas. Ingredient prices have gone up as well, so it's really tough to run a business these days.
I drive a cargo truck, and it takes about 300 liters to fill up. But lately, it's been really hard to keep working. I even tried driving slower to cut down fuel use, but I still can't manage to fill up even half of what I normally would.
Fuel prices in South Korea have been steadily rising over the past week. Today, the nationwide average for gasoline is 1,921 per liter, an increase of more than 5% compared to a week ago. In Seoul, prices are even higher at 1,964 won per liter on average. This comes after the government rolled out the second round of its price cap last Friday. The Ministry of Trade, Industry and Resources raised the ceiling by 210 won for both gasoline and diesel in response to rising global oil prices. And given a delay of about 2 to 3 weeks before global price changes are reflected at local pumps, prices here are likely to keep rising for now, regardless of short-term moves in global oil markets.
Right, and in light of that reality, Chunong, I believe the government here has raised its alert level for crude oil. Could you tell us more?
Right, so the government announced yesterday that it would upgrade the energy security alert for crude oil to the second highest level, which has already been activated starting today. The system is consisted of 4 tiers based on the severity of the crisis and its impact on daily life and the economy. Since the onset of the Middle East conflict, the alert has been raised in stages roughly every 2 weeks, reflecting growing concerns over potential supply disruptions. At this elevated level, the government will fully activate its emergency response measures, including securing alternative supplies that bypass the Strait of Hormuz and increasing overseas inflows. At the same time, the government is calling on the public to use less energy. Starting next week, the public sector's vehicle rotation will be tightened from a 5-day to a 2-day system, with an odd-even schedule based on the last digit of a vehicle's license plate. A 5-day weekday-based rotation will also apply to public parking facilities that were not previously included. That's the latest from here, and back to you, Sunny.
All right, Chunong, thank you for that coverage. That was our Kim Jun-hong reporting live from the ground. Up next, we share with you the tangible impact of the turmoil in the Middle East on South Korea's consumer prices, which rose to over 2% last month, largely driven by petroleum products. Our correspondent Kim Do-yeon has details.
South Korea's consumer price growth accelerated to 2.2% in March, driven almost entirely by a massive spike in global oil prices. According to the Ministry of Data and Statistics on Thursday, the overall inflation rate was heavily pressured by the energy sector. Petroleum product prices surged 9.9% from a year ago, marking the fastest rise since October 2022, when oil prices rose during the war in Ukraine.
The biggest factor is the rise in global oil prices due to the situation in the Middle East. Dubai crude soared to $128 in March from $68.04 the month before. This seems to have significantly driven up our domestic fuel costs.
This near 10% jump in petroleum prices marks a sharp reversal from the previous month. In February, fuel prices had actually declined by 2.4% on year. But with food prices going up, the overall index was around the same level at 2.0%. Now, for this month, breaking down the energy shock, the impact was most severe in diesel. Diesel prices jumped 17% due to its broad use across industrial, transport, and military sectors, while gasoline rose 8%. Despite this severe external shock, the headline inflation rate was kept from spiraling further. The government's price ceilings on fuel products effectively mitigated the spike, keeping South Korea's figures lower than those of other major economies. The energy price surge was also offset by a decline in food costs, a reversal of the factors from the previous month. Overall, agricultural, livestock, and fishery prices fell 0.6%. The fresh food index saw a steeper drop of 6.6% as warmer spring weather boosted crop production. Additionally, processed food inflation slowed following factory price cuts for staple ingredients like flour and sugar. Looking ahead, the ministry warns that upward pressure is expected to persist in April as higher energy costs will inevitably reflect in international airfare and imported agricultural goods. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
North Korea has rebuked the most recent UN resolution on its human rights abuses, referring to it as, quote, a political provocation. Our defense correspondent Kim Bo-kyung reports.
North Korea strongly condemned the UN's recent adoption of a human rights resolution against the regime, calling it a grave political provocation against the dignity and sovereignty of its own state. This was in a statement from the regime's foreign ministry spokesperson and delivered by the Korean Central News Agency on Thursday. The statement argued that the UN human rights review system specifically targeting individual states was a hostile act that violates the UN Charter's principles of sovereign equality and non-interference in internal affairs. The ministry criticized the long-term practice of adopting such resolutions against North Korea for over 20 years, saying this shows the regrettable state of the UN human rights stage that has been extremely tainted by politicization, selectivity, and double standards. It added that the most urgent task for the UN Human Rights Council today should be investigating and holding accountable hegemonic powers for what it called large-scale crimes against humanity, mentioning tragic incidents of children killed in large numbers, apparently referring to a recent U.S. attack that led to at least 175 students and teachers' deaths in an elementary school in Iran. The ministry warned that countries committing such malicious acts, which also joined in defaming the regime, would certainly have to pay for their actions. This followed the UN Human Rights Council's adoption of the resolution by consensus on March 30th, with a total of 50 countries, including South Korea, co-sponsoring the resolution.
North Korea treats human rights as an issue of sovereignty and non-interference. So while it didn't directly mention South Korea's co-sponsorship, the statement likely carries an implicit criticism.
This marked the 24th consecutive year since 2003 that a resolution on North Korean human rights has been adopted. Kim Bo-kyung, Arirang News.
In other news now, President Lee Jae-myung believes diplomatic relations between South Korea and France need to transcend partnership to embrace strategic collaboration. In a contribution to French daily Le Figaro published on this Thursday, he called for such collaboration to include artificial intelligence, nuclear energy, hydrogen and space technology. President Lee is scheduled to host his French counterpart Emmanuel Macron at the Blue House tomorrow, that is Friday. Now, this year marks 140 years since the start of diplomatic relations between Korea and France. A senior European Parliament lawmaker has reaffirmed the importance of partnership between South Korea and Europe amid the current turbulent geopolitical landscape. Our senior correspondent Oh Soo-young sat down with him.
Brussels sees Seoul as one of its most important partners and allies, aligned strategically and in terms of values. That's according to David McAllister, chair of the European Parliament's Foreign Affairs Committee, who is visiting South Korea and Japan this week, leading a 7-member delegation.
And with our visit, we would like to underline how much we appreciate, how much we value the strategic partnership with the Republic of Korea. South Korea is one of our most important bilateral partners and allies in the world.
The trip comes as tensions around Iran and the Strait of Hormuz raise concerns over shipping, supply chains and energy flows for Korea and Europe alike.
We believe in the freedom of navigation, and this includes the free passage through the Strait of Hormuz, and the effects are just as immense for South Korea as they are for Europe, so we're in this together.
The Middle East situation also comes at a time when many countries are moving to build greater strategic autonomy, meaning the ability to act more independently on defence and security. For Europe, that means higher defence spending and capability building, while maintaining close ties with Washington.
When it comes to security and defence, for instance, we need to be more on equal footing with the US within NATO. That's why we are stepping up our investments in our own security and defence. It's about strengthening the European pillar within NATO.
That shift is also opening space for more practical cooperation with South Korea.
So there's also potential for the Korean defence industry in Europe in the upcoming years, when we are working step by step in establishing the European Defence Union, which a major component is, of course, that we step up our own European defence industry, but we also will continue to import excellent products from like-minded partners, including Korea.
Looking ahead, McAllister pointed to further areas for cooperation, from digital and security partnerships to joint research, with Korea as the first Asian country associated with the EU's Horizon programme. McAllister met with Deputy Foreign Minister Chung Yi-hae on Wednesday. Seoul's foreign ministry says the two sides noted that bilateral ties have developed across a wide range of areas, from the economy and trade to security, defence and people-to-people exchanges. They also discussed the situation on the Korean Peninsula, in Ukraine and in the Middle East, agreeing on the need to continue close communication at all levels going forward. Oh Soo-young, Arirang News.
This is The World Now, bringing you everything you need to know from around the globe. President Donald Trump has warned that he may pull the United States out of NATO, blaming European allies for refusing to send warships to reopen the Strait of Hormuz amid the ongoing U.S. war with Iran. Speaking to Reuters on Wednesday, Trump said he would address the nation to express his disgust with NATO, confirming he was absolutely considering withdrawal. Hours earlier, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth declined to reaffirm U.S. commitment to Article 5, the core guarantee that an attack on one NATO member is an attack on all. Other NATO members responded to the comments. Poland urged calm and said there is no NATO without the United States. Germany reaffirmed its commitment to the alliance, and UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer said London would strengthen economic and defense ties with Europe, regardless of Washington's next move. Security analysts warn that repeated U.S. threats against the alliance give Russia grounds to test whether collective defense commitments still hold. The United States on Wednesday lifted sanctions against Venezuelan interim President Delcy Rodriguez. This clears the way for her government to reclaim control of Venezuela's state-owned oil assets in the U.S., including refiner Citgo Petroleum. The Rodriguez government is reportedly already preparing to take over the boards of Venezuela's U.S.-based oil subsidiaries, assets that opposition-appointed supervisors have controlled since 2019. Rodriguez called the decision a step toward normalizing relations and urged Washington to lift all remaining sanctions on Venezuela. Since U.S. forces seized former President Nicolas Maduro in a raid at the start of the year, Washington has formally recognized Rodriguez as Venezuela's leader, sent cabinet officials to Caracas alongside potential investors, and reached an agreement for the U.S. to purchase Venezuelan oil. NASA's Artemis II mission lifted off from Kennedy Space Center in Florida on Wednesday. The 10-day journey around the moon will send humans deeper into space than ever before. NASA astronauts Reed Wiseman, Victor Glover, and Christina Koch, along with Canadian astronaut Jeremy Henson, lifted off just before sunset aboard the Space Launch System rocket. 3.5 hours into flight, the crew will take manual control of the Orion capsule to test the steering and maneuverability. That is the first of dozens of test objectives planned throughout the mission. Artemis II is a critical step toward NASA's first crewed lunar landing since 1972, which the agency targets for 2028. Chu Ji-han, Arirang News.
Today was a nice, clear day. Starting tomorrow, a spring flower festival will take place for 5 days in Yeouido. So it's a great time to get outside and enjoy the season in full bloom. But the clear weather will be short-lived, as rain is back in the forecast starting tomorrow. Rain will begin on Jeju-do Island late tomorrow afternoon, then spread nationwide overnight, continuing through Saturday afternoon. As for rainfall amount, Jeju-do will see over 100 millimeters of rain in the mountainous areas. The southern parts will see 10 to 60 millimeters of rain, while the central regions will see 5 to 30 millimeters of rain. In particular, from late tomorrow night into early Saturday morning, heavy downpours of 20 to 30 millimeters per hour are expected in the mountainous areas of Jeju-do Island, accompanied by strong winds and lightning. So please take extra caution. Meanwhile, ultrafine dust levels will be bad across the capital area, the central regions, and also parts of the southwest. Tomorrow, Seoul will start the day at 6 degrees Celsius, Chuncheon at 3 degrees, Busan at 9 degrees. Then by the afternoon, Seoul will get up to 21 degrees, while Daejeon, Daegu, Gyeongju will all top out at 22 degrees. Rain will gradually stop in the western regions by Saturday afternoon. Now here's a look at the weather around the world.
Those are the headlines at this hour here in South Korea. Coming up right after this break is our daily panel session. Thank you for now.
On behalf of the government and the people of the Democratic Republic of Timor-Leste, I would like to warmly congratulate Arirang TV on its 30th anniversary. For 3 decades, Arirang TV has played an important role in connecting Korea with the world, sharing Korean culture, values, and stories with the global audience, while also giving space to diverse international voices. Through its programs, Arirang has helped build understanding, dialogue, and friendship across borders. For Timor-Leste, Arirang TV has been a valuable platform that brings greater visibility to international cooperation and culture exchange. It contributes to mutual understanding between our people and strengthening the spirit of global partnership. As Timor-Leste and the Republic of Korea continue to deepen our friendship, I hope Arirang TV will remain a bridge that connects cultures, promotes peace, and inspires future generations. Once again, congratulations on the 30 years of meaningful broadcasting. I wish Arirang TV continued success and many more years of positive global impact.
세상이 소원과 눅눅했던 고요가 잠을 이룬 나의 발을 채우면 뭉툭해져 섞인 나의 길을
On Press Perspective today, we touch upon all things K yet again with the focus on literature, video games, and of course, music.
Hello and welcome to Press Perspective for this Thursday, April 2nd here in Seoul. I'm Min Sun-hee. Nobel laureate Han Gang won a National Book Critics Circle Award for fiction for her novel We Do Not Part, which delves into the traumatic aftermath of the massacre of people in the southern Korean island of Jeju in the 1940s. For more on this, our freelance reporter David Lee here in the studio. David, it's been a while. Welcome back.
Thank you for having me.
I also have writer Colin Marshall with us. Colin, it's lovely to have you here.
Glad to be here.
David, let's start off with the recent acknowledgement that Han Gang received from critics in the U.S.
Yes, so her book, We Do Not Part, won the National Book Critics Circle Award in the U.S., which awards the best English language book of the year. It was actually written back in 2021, but it was translated into English at the start of last year, and that's why she was eligible for the award this year. And as you mentioned in the beginning, it's based on the devastating aftermath of the Jeju April 3rd uprising and massacre in the late 1940s, where thousands of people were killed, reportedly. And it's this book is actually the third translated novel to win in the history of the National Book Critics Circle Award. And the book is also praised in many other countries like France and Sweden, which it was also translated in their respective languages. And it's known to have contributed to Han Gang's, as we all know, her incredible Nobel Prize win in 2024, where her book Human X, which also delves into a painful history of South Korea, in this case the raw devastation of the Gwangju uprising. But this isn't her first time that she's really become the center of the literature community in the world. Back in 2016, her book The Vegetarian was the first Korean novel to win the International Booker Prize. This is not new territory for her, and just her works continue to attract global audiences, and the critics have continued to notice her work.
You're right, indeed. Colin, what's your take, I wonder, on the journey beyond borders of South Korean literature in recent years?
Well, it's a journey I've been following pretty much since the beginning, since the popularity of Korean literature abroad around the world only really goes back about 15 years. You can't find many high-profile examples, or any before that. One of the earliest is Shin Kyung-suk, who had the novel translated as Please Look After Mom. About 2011, it got the nod from Oprah Winfrey, the big talk show host, and it won the Man Asian Literary Prize. A few years later, Han Gang's The Vegetarian won the Booker. And so we have these particular marks on the timeline, others as well, but it can look like, if you zoom out, that Korean literature has just been going from strength to strength and gaining popularity, sweeping the world. But when you zoom in, it's been in a bit more fits and starts than it might seem. It's been not as easy a trajectory to project or even chart as it might seem, because, there are many reasons, and one of them being that Korean literature is in many ways an unlikely candidate to become a global literature, because if you read Korean novels, for obvious reasons, and you can tell right away, they assume the audience is Korean. They assume the reader is Korean, has had specific experiences, and comes with specific knowledge. So a lot of early translated Korean literature was full of footnotes, or it got awkwardly explanatory because there was just too much a foreign reader wouldn't know. Now, since then, of course, more writers have been consciously writing for a global or potentially global audience in hopes of translation, and that can be a good thing or a bad thing. But as we've seen in some of the high-profile successes, as I say, Shin Kyung-suk, Please Look After Mom, or The Vegetarian, these were also somewhat controversial translations, despite or because of their success, because you could say that what was done to them in translation was more than translating. There was something else brought to them by the translator that made them more appealing to an English language audience, specifically. And so, this is a debate many translators get into, especially in the academy. What's translation? How much is going too far? How faithful do you have to be? How much can you change the style? Every translator has his or her own method. But I think for Korean literature, the most successful books have also been sometimes the more adapted than translated, I will say, which is not necessarily a bad thing at all. I often think, and I study translation here myself in Korea, I often think that when you're translating, you are creating something new. You're not simply replicating the original text, and you can't hope to do it, especially in a language like Korean. You know, there was a piece in the New Yorker years ago on the Literature Translation Institute of Korea, where I studied, and that has been seen as the main body lobbying for a Nobel Prize for a Korean writer, which eventually was received by Hangang, as David said. And there was a fan of Korean literature interviewed for this piece who said something like, you know, I think the reason why Korea hasn't won a Nobel Prize yet, at that time, Hangang's prize had not been won, it's because Korean is too subtle and too distinctive a language to be appreciated in translation. Really, first, the Swedish Academy has to learn Korean. And then Hangang, obviously didn't say Hangang, then the prize will be won by a Korean writer. And, you know, that didn't have to happen, but I do think that sentiment is not without its truth. I think for a full appreciation of Korean literature, you do have to go to the original. But starting with a translation is not a bad thing at all.
Right, some food for thought right there. David, along with K-literature and, of course, K-pop, K-games were recently highlighted by the New York Times. Could you tell us a bit more about this?
Yeah, so South Korea is huge on gaming culture. You know, South Korea, it's the 4th largest gaming market in the world, behind countries like the US and China and Japan. It's estimated to be $14.6 billion. And, you know, the country has the best pro gamers in the world. If you look back to the StarCraft League back in the early 2000s, you know, there were all of the top tier players were from South Korea. If you look at today's League of Legends League, you know, players like Faker, all of the top teams, top players are from South Korea. And you know, if you just come to Seoul, you can see the magnitude of the gaming industry and the culture here. You see PC bangs or internet cafes in every corner of Seoul. But the key thing here is that the titles of the games here that are popular, like StarCraft and League of Legends, the majority of them are developed in foreign countries, especially the United States. So it was only with PUBG Battleground that a Korean game really made headlines overseas as well, back in 2017. But recently, in recent years, Korean games like Stellar Blade and Lies of P have gained international fame. And this is significant because these games are not just for computer games, but they're also developed for console systems such as PlayStation or Xbox or Nintendo. And the reason that this is important is because the non-mobile game industry is nearly split evenly between computer games and console systems. And you know, these console systems sometimes, most of the times they require much more intricate development. So the price tags for developing these games are much more higher, and yeah, it just kind of tells how much you know, the company is capable of developing these very top-tier games. And you know, the government has also jumped into this bandwagon. You know, President Lee Jae-myung, he announced that the game industry is a truly authentic export for South Korea. It really lines up with his agenda of making South Korea a top-tier soft power giant in the world. So the gaming initiatives in the country are set to receive $50 million from the government in the next few years. And the New York Times article also pointed out that the future strategy for these Korean games, if they want to continue their success, maybe they could take hints from the success of, you know, K-pop and K-dramas, where you know, these sectors, they really involved the stylized takes of modern Korean culture. And they took those themes and, you know, they incorporated it into their music, into their fashion. So yeah, let's see what other games, Korean games, come out in the next few years.
Right, indeed. Well, the current administration's support for the gaming industry itself and for games in general is quite remarkable, Colin. I'm sure you'd agree, especially if you consider that about a decade ago, previous administrations had even been considering the idea of linking gaming to addiction. Right. Do you believe the public here is still regards gaming with a bit of caution, given fears about potential addiction.
Right. If you look at the history of gaming in Korea or the Korean gaming industry, you see these periods of suspicion and even panic every so often. Even early on in the early 80s, when video arcades started popping up in Korea, kids were hanging out at them and they weren't cleanly separated from gambling establishments. So before those two were extracted from each other, there was a lot of moral panic here about arcades themselves. Later on, the turn of the 90s, excuse me, you had a lot of suspicion about the physiological effects of games, and there were glasses on the market you could put. Allegedly, they would stop you from having seizures, but of course the rumor was only Japanese games cause seizures. So if you're playing those, wear the glasses, but don't be playing Japanese games, that whole thing. And then with the technology developing, you had PC bang, as David mentioned. There's fears of kids hanging out too much there and getting corrupted, playing StarCraft or what have you, if they don't turn into pro gaming athletes, that is. Now, with addiction, I think this it's begun to cross cultural boundaries in many ways, because technology has made everything more addictive. It's not just games. Food has become more addictive. Gambling has become more addictive, more pervasive in the US especially. Social media, need I say more? And so as everything grows more addictive, you do see some countries not necessarily turning games or other forms of technology into controlled substances, but sometimes starting to classify them as official public health threats. So you might see more of that here as well. I mean, Korea's usually ahead in thinking about technology for good or ill, sometimes getting too anxious about technology, sometimes adopting too fast. But I think if any country will sort of go through early trial and error about how to handle this increasing form of addiction, it will be Korea. And indeed, I think it was 10 years ago, there was a ban on gaming at night, which wasn't very successful. But again, it's, policies get tried out, techniques get tried out. So there will be some innovation happening here, I'm sure, one way or the other.
Right. Moving forward, David, let's now turn to BTS's latest achievements with its new album, Arirang, which I believe is topping charts in the US and over in the UK.
Yes, and those are the two biggest music charts in the world. So first of all, it's the title song of the album, Swim, topped the Billboard Hot 100. And its 10th studio album, Arirang, topped the Billboard 200 charts, which means that BTS currently has the #1 song and the #1 album in the United States, which is, the biggest music market in the world. And as you mentioned, it also topped the second biggest music market in the world in the UK by topping the UK official albums chart. And also, its title song, Swim, made it the first time that the group topped the UK singles chart as well, which is pretty significant. And the album sales are becoming a global phenomenon. It's topped charts in Australia, Germany, Japan. Hybe just announced that it sold 4.16 million album copies within the first week of its release. But just a few weeks ago, the narrative was a little bit different because there was a little bit of the disappointment in the BTS's comeback stage in Gangwon Square, where authorities and the label Hybe, they were expecting around 260,000 people to congregate near the square, but according to the Seoul city officials, only about 48,000 gathered during the performance. Hybe did report that closer to 144,000 attended, but the media, they really tied into the fact that the label's shares fell 14.5%. They really tied that with the disappointing turnout for the comeback stage, and it made it worse with local businesses also reporting losses. They were expecting more business profits from the visitors and just the hype of the event. But again, the results of the charts, they, I think, make Hybe happy again, and it's really good news for them. Also, Netflix, they announced that the live stream drew 18.4 million viewers worldwide, entering the top 10 charts in over 80 countries. So yeah, there's kind of a balancing act there. So, and we also can't forget that BTS is about to start their world tour in a week week's time, actually. The first concert will start in Goyang on Thursday. And the media, they repeatedly compared it to Taylor Swift's Eras Tour, which is really the benchmark of world tours. It was the first to break the threshold of $2 billion in revenue from the tour. And yeah, so as BTS is set to perform in over 80 shows across 23 countries, yeah, I think the world really witnessed the comeback of the biggest boy band in the group, the biggest music group in the world.
Right, and as you mentioned, David, its album Arirang, it's doing remarkably well on charts in the US and in the UK. Colin, now here's a difficult question for you. How do you respond to the debate about cultural identity with regard to BTS's latest album Arirang?
Yes, the album has been well reviewed in the Western press overall. If you just line up all the reviews together, it's been almost entirely positive. And even the less positive reviews, they're not necessarily panning it, but they do have certain objections. There have been some critics willing to make objections to the way the BTS sound has evolved, and in doing so, they risk the wrath and the ire of BTS's large army, so-called, of fans, because they always lash out on social media and elsewhere whenever something insufficiently positive is written about BTS. So it's telling that you do see some critics in the English language media, at least daring to do that. And when they have lodged criticisms of Arirang, they tend to frame them in terms of a promise of Koreanness not being fully delivered, in that when you name an album Arirang, you set certain expectations, shall we say. This is an album named after the folk song that is the unofficial anthem of the Korean people. It is also the namesake of this very network. And that signals a certain intent, I don't know if I would say nationalist intent, but certainly an intent to express a Korean identity through the music. And then when you listen to the music, or when some of these critics have listened to it, to them, I think it sounds very much like it could have been made anywhere. Even if they like it, some have described the sound as having a certain placelessness. And if you look at the roster of contributors to the album, you can kind of see why. Because, of course, the members of BTS are all there. They're Korean, naturally. But then there's a list a mile long of writers and producers, almost to a single one, Westerners, and almost all of them American. And the album was recorded almost entirely in Los Angeles as well, as far as I understand it. So given these factors, one does wonder, to what extent can we even call this a Korean album? And you listen to it, and the first thing you hear is this blast of English. And through the whole album, it's mostly sung in English. And the members themselves, there's a documentary about the making of this album, which is also on Netflix, I believe. And you can see one of the members just say, why is there so much English on this album? I mean, he's one of the guys in BTS himself wondering, like, what's going on here? Or there's another scene where they're showing sort of visible discomfort with interpolating the song Arirang into the opening cut, this like club song that opens the album. I mean, like, I don't know, this feels a bit like eating kimchi rice at a Paris baguette. Like they didn't like themselves to an extent that that form of cross-cultural sort of collaboration at that stage. But this underscores the fact that BTS is a big business. And the members are one thing, they're the driving force, you could say, but then there are many forces working around them as well. And so if this album Arirang has shortcomings, sometimes I think that they could be phrased as, they could be encapsulated by saying that maybe BTS themselves are not present enough in the album. Maybe there's too little BTS in this album, which I don't know how that's going to go down with the BTS army, but that seems to be, if there are dissatisfactions, that seems to be what it's about. But there are plenty of nods to their Korean heritage, their Korean background, Korean culture, if you know where to look. They're subtle, though. The question being, are they too subtle? Are they not subtle enough? Are they, I don't know. There's a line in the album, sung in English, of course. It says something like, people are going to hear the story they want to hear. And I think that's true of this debate as well. People, they listen to Arirang and they hear what they want to hear, for good or for ill.
Right. Well, regardless of the debate, there is much excitement for the BTS World Tour, as David was saying, among the fans, of course, worldwide. All right, I'll leave it at that. Colin, as always, thank you so much for your time and your thoughts.
Thank you.
David, thank you very much for your insights.
Thank you, Sunny.
Right, that ends this edition of Press Perspective. As always, thank you for watching.
you